As we talked about, the St. Matthew Passion is in two large parts, with a break in the middle, which would have been in Bach's time for the sermon. However, we will not have a sermon in our performance. But we do want to talk about now the final chorus of Part 1, which frames the story in Part 1 and balances the earlier opening chorus that we discussed before. Bach felt in this that he, in order to have just what he needed, he actually borrowed a chorus that he had already written for an earlier version of the St. John Passion, which doesn't quite have the same weight of these framing choruses. This one is also based on a chorale, only the difference here is that instead of the chorale being a separate element above, floating above the rest of the chorus, here the chorale is in the soprano part all the way through. It's sung by a single chorus with all the sopranos singing the chorale melody, and the chorus, the altos, tenors, and basses, singing around that melody in response to the meaning of those words and making commentary on the melody itself. There is an orchestral ritornello, but this time it's setting up not the chorale melody, but it's setting up the accompaniment underneath the chorale melody. And here it's in major mode, E major, which is our home key, E major, E minor. And the motive throughout are pairs of 16th notes, which are associated, whether in major or minor, with tiers in arias and choruses elsewhere in Part 1 and Part 2 of the Passion. And here he sets long sequences in the middle of the ritornello along these motivic lines. So again, mixtures of major and minor. This is where the complexity of Bach comes in, the harmonic complexity of different harmonic colors, and the formal complexity. And yet, what makes this memorable music that touches us directly and we can respond to the first time we hear it, is that the different elements that go into this mixture are all very clearly defined, like that weeping motive, and like the chorale melody now, which soars above, or soars within the choir, I should say. O Mensch, bewein dein Sünde groß, darum Christus sein Vater schoß, äußert und kam auf Erden. And just like in the chorales that we heard that were just by themselves in harmonizations, those first three lines then repeat, and then the second half of the chorale comes. The text of this chorale relates not directly in response to what has just happened at the end of Part 1 in the story. At the end of Part 1 in the story, Jesus has been arrested and his and is taken away, and his disciples flee. And so there's the sense of the abandonment of Christ. And yet what this chorus is about is looking over the frame of Christ's life, beginning with the birth. The first line is, O humankind, bewail your great sin. For this Christ from his Father's bosom went forth and came to earth, born of a virgin, pure and gentle, for our sake. He came to mediate for us. To the dead he gave life, that is, in his healing ministry. He raised the dead and conquered all sickness, until the time came that he should be sacrificed for us. So again, the point of incorporating this chorale, the text of which was written before Bach's time, was to frame the whole work in the context of the whole life of Christ and of the understanding of its destiny. For each verse of the hymn, the chorus underneath makes commentary, often happening after. So in the case of this one, the first line, as I said, is O Mensch, bewein dein Sünde groß. bewein, bewail your sinfulness. The response to that, the chorus sings, O Mensch, bewein dein Sünde groß. And so it takes a long melisma, or many notes for the same word, on the word bewein, bemoan. A similar thing happens in different choruses where if you listen and follow along the words for each line and then hear what the chorus sings, they are in direct response to what's being said. At the very end, the last line talks about Wohl an dem Kreuze lang, he on the wood of the cross bore our sins. And here, in the bass line of the chorus, preceding instead of following the melodic line sung by the sopranos, we hear it as though the cross itself is being lifted. Wohl an dem Kreuze lange. So again, this great sensitivity to the words, all with the one purpose of making very clear the mission of the overall story and the mission of Christ and the love affair between Christ and God's people.